The table was full plates of roasted chicken and vegetables, the good china candles flickering in the center. Everyone was talking over each other, the kids laughing, my mother-in-law telling a story. It felt perfect, solid. I remember looking at my husband at the head of the table, his face lit up with a smile, and I felt this wave of contentment. This is what I'd built. This was my family. He was serving himself another piece of the pie. I'd baked my famous apple pie. He looked across the table at me, and the smile just vanished from his eyes. His voice cut through the chatter, cold and flat. He said, his ex-wife would never have let herself go like this, that she knew how to take care of herself. Then he said it. The words hung in the air for a second before they landed. He called me a fat pig. The room went absolutely silent. You could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. I felt the heat rush to my face, but my hands went cold. I saw my daughter's fork stop halfway to her mouth. My father just stared at his plate, and my husband, he just shrugged and took a bite of pie like had commented on the weather. In that silence, something inside me broke, but it wasn't a collapse. It was a shattering of a cage. All the times I'd made excuses for him, all the little comments I'd swallowed, they just didn't matter anymore. I looked at my children's horrified faces, and I knew. I pushed my chair back. The sound of the legs scraping the floor was incredibly loud. I placed my napkin neatly beside my plate. I looked him right in the eye, and my voice was steady. I told him I wasn't the one who was disgusting. I told him the dinner was over. I walked around the table, took my children by the hand, and we left the room. I didn't look back. The silence we left behind was heavier than any noise. The first thing to understand is that this was not a simple insult. It was a performance. He chose a public place deliberately. The goal was to maximize your humiliation. It's about control. By saying this where others can hear, he demonstrates his power over you. He sends a message that he can treat you this way, and there is nothing you can do about it. Then he brought in your predecessor. Mentioning the ex-wife is a specific tactic called triangulation. It's designed to devalue you by creating a comparison, as saying, you are not as good as someone else, someone I once chose. This creates a deep sense of insecurity. It makes you compete for his approval. The underlying motive here is often a profound insecurity within himself. By cutting you down, he feels taller. This single event is likely not an isolated incident. It's probably the most visible part of a pattern. Think about the smaller comments that came before this, the criticisms about your appearance, your choices, your personality. This public outburst is just the escalation of a long campaign. It's what we call death by 1,000 cuts. Each small cut makes you more vulnerable to the big one. We often see traits of narcissism in this behavior: a lack of empathy for your pain, a sense of entitlement to speak to you this way. There's also the crabs in a bucket mentality. If he feels you are growing stronger or more independent, he will pull you back down into the bucket with him. He cannot allow you to feel good about yourself because that might mean you leave. Now let's talk about the impact on you. The immediate feeling is probably shock, then shame, a sense of unreality, like this cannot be happening. But the most dangerous part is the risk of internalization. You might start to believe him. You might think, maybe I am a fat pig. This is exactly what the abuse is designed to do. It rewires your own self-perception to match his insults. Be prepared for what comes next. When you confront him, he will not take responsibility. He will likely gaslight you. He might say it was just a joke, that you have no sense of humor. He will tell you that you are too sensitive, that you are Overreacting, he will shift the blame onto you for your reaction. This is a classic manipulation tactic to avoid accountability. The long-term effects of enduring this are serious. It can lead to chronic anxiety, depression, and a form of PTSD known as complex PTSD. Your nervous system remains in a constant state of alert, waiting for the next attack. Your self-worth becomes eroded to nothing. The pathway out begins with a single firm realization. This is abuse. It is not a mistake. It is a pattern of behavior chosen to control you. From that realization, you must set a boundary. The boundary is non-negotiable. This behavior is unacceptable. Enforcing that boundary may mean leaving the situation, at least temporarily. You must seek support from people who see the reality of the situation. Talk to a trusted friend or a therapist who specializes in abusive dynamics. You need external validation that you are not crazy, that this is wrong. Your mind has been poisoned by his words, and you need a neutral party to help you detox. The final step is rebuilding your self-worth entirely separately from him. His opinions are weapons, not reflections of reality. You must rediscover your own strength. Focus on self-care. Reconnect with the things you loved before the relationship. The goal is to build a self-concept so solid that his words simply bounce off because you know they are not true. I was so happy to be at their house for dinner. The table was set beautifully, and the food smelled amazing. You could tell she'd put so much effort into making everything perfect for everyone. My brother was laughing, telling a story, and I remember thinking how normal it all seemed. How comfortable I'd seen little things before, a sharp comment here, an eye roll there, but I always told myself it was nothing, just the stress of everyday life. Then he said it was so sudden, so venomous. He called her a fat pig right there at the table, just completely out of the blue. The words hung in the air for a second, and my brain couldn't even process them. I looked at her face, and it was like watching a light go out. Her smile just vanished, replaced by this look of pure hurt. I felt my own stomach twist into a knot. I looked around the table at my parents, at my other siblings. Everyone was just staring at their plates, completely silent. No one knew what to do. My heart was pounding. Part of me wanted to scream at him, to tell him he was a monster, but another part was terrified. This was my brother. If I said something, would I make it worse? Would he turn on me? Would I tear the whole family apart? But then I looked at her again, sitting there so small and humiliated, and I knew I couldn't just sit there. I couldn't be complicit in that silence. I pushed my chair back. The sound was so loud in the quiet room. I looked right at my brother, and I told him he was way out of line, that what he said was disgusting and cruel. His face turned red. He started yelling at me, telling me to mind my own business, that this was between him and his wife. I ignored him. I walked over to her, and I put my arm around her. I told her she didn't deserve that. Not ever. Things have been different since that night. He doesn't really talk to me anymore, and that's fine. It's a price I'm willing to pay. She calls me now just to talk. We have coffee. I made sure she knew that she had someone in her corner, that the family saw what happened, and we didn't approve. It wasn't about choosing sides. It was about choosing what was right. The restaurant was loud, clattering plates, and other people's laughter. He leaned across the table, his voice low so only I could hear. "You're eating like a fat pig," he said it with a little smile, like it was a joke. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. I could feel the heat in my cheeks, the sting in my eyes, but I didn't let the tears fall. Something else happened. A switch flipped inside me. It wasn't heat anymore. It was ice cold clear. Calm. I put the fork down. I looked at my plate, and I made a decision right then. This was the last time I played my part. I looked down. I let my shoulders slump. I let him think he had won, that he had successfully crushed me again. I went home and I was quiet. I was the perfect subdued wife, but inside, I was a general preparing for war. The next day I opened a secret bank account. I started moving small amounts of money he would never notice missing. I found the best divorce lawyer in the city, and I paid the retainer with cash. I started going to the gym, but not for him, never for him. It was for me to feel my own strength returning. I documented everything, every text message, every email. I recorded his rants. When he thought I was just being a passive listener, I was gathering an arsenal. I waited for the perfect moment. It was his mother's birthday dinner at a fancy steakhouse. The whole family was there. He was holding court, laughing, feeling important. Then he made a comment, a little jab about my new health kick. He said, trying to fix the problem, are we? And I smiled. I looked right at him, and I said, no, I'm fixing myself so I can leave the problem behind. The table went quiet. I took out my phone and I played it. His voice clear as day from the week before. You're eating like a fat pig. The color drained from his face. Then I took the envelope from my bag and slid it across the table. The divorce papers. I told him everything right there in front of his mother, his sister, everyone. I listed the financial accounts had hidden. I described the years of quiet contempt. My voice was steady. It was the steadiest it had ever been. The lawyer handled the rest. It was a clean break, a very favorable settlement. I got the house. I got my freedom. Now my life is quiet in a different way. It's a peaceful, quiet. I wake up and I decide what I want to do. I eat what I want when I want. The reflection in the mirror is someone I'm getting to know again, someone strong. He thought his words would break me. He thought calling me a fat pig would keep me small, but it was the final push. I needed to become large, to take up space, to take back everything. My happiness is the final piece of the revenge, and it's the part that lasts forever. The dinner table was my favorite place. It was where we all came together. The food was warm. My grandparents were visiting, and everything felt safe. I was 10. I was just happy then. I heard my dad's voice change. It wasn't his normal voice. It got lower, sharper. I didn't understand the words at first, just the tone. It was like ice. I stopped eating. I looked at my mom. Her face, it just crumpled. She looked so small, and I felt this panic, this need to make it stop, to make her smile again. After he said it, the word just hung there. Pig. The room went completely silent. You could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. That silence was worse than any yelling. It was heavy. I remember pushing my peas around my plate, thinking if I just stayed quiet, if I was really good, maybe it would fix it. No one ever talked about it, not the next day, not ever. It became this secret we all knew. That night followed me. I got nervous at dinner, always waiting for the other shoe to drop in my own relationships. I was terrified of conflict. I'd agree to anything just to keep the peace, or I'd get angry over tiny things because I was so afraid of the big anger, the kind that could shatter a person. It took me years to realize that what I saw wasn't normal. It was verbal abuse. Understanding that was the first step to healing. I had to go to therapy to untangle all of it, to learn that love isn't supposed to sound like that. I had to tell my dad, as an adult, how much that one sentence shaped me. It wasn't about blaming him. It was about freeing myself. Now in my own home, I am so careful with my words. I am building something different. You can break the cycle. The past doesn't have to be a blueprint. I was just folding laundry when my phone buzzed, a direct message from his new wife. My first thought was, what does she want? Is this some kind of trick? Is he putting her up to this to see how I'll react? Her message was so timid, so carefully worded. She mentioned a dinner party something had said to her. Comparison. And my name was in it. I felt that old familiar coldness in my stomach. She was asking me very gently if it was true, if the things he said about me, about our marriage, were real. I could feel the hesitation in her words. She was scared. She was testing the waters, terrified of what she might find, and I just knew. I knew that tone. ID lived that hesitation. I wrote back. I told her we should talk on the phone. Her voice was so quiet. She told me what he called her, the name, the fat pig, and how had held me up as some kind of perfect, unattainable standard, the perfect ex-wife, and I actually laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. I had to tell her. I had to set the record straight. I said, listen to me, that perfect woman, she doesn't exist. He invented her. I told her about the time we were at his company picnic. He made a comment about the potato salad I brought, said it was store-bought, that I was too lazy to make it myself, that everyone could tell. He said it loud enough for his colleagues to hear. Then he put his arm around me and smiled like it was a joke. I remember just freezing, my face burning. He did the same thing to you, didn't he? The public humiliation, then they act like it's nothing. She was silent for a moment, then she whispered, yes, he does that. And we just started talking, story after story, the little criticisms about my appearance, the way had always find a flaw, the way had isolate me from my friends, saying they were a bad influence. It was like we were reading from the same script, just different casts. We weren't rivals, we were survivors. We had both been living in the same house of mirrors he built. I told her to start saving messages, to keep a journal with dates. I told her which of his friends were actually decent, who might be an ally. I gave her the name of my lawyer. She kept saying thank you over and over, and her voice got stronger. With each one she wasn't alone anymore, and honestly neither was I. Talking to her, I felt like I was finally vindicating the woman I was back then, the one who thought it was all her fault. We decided we wouldn't let him pit us against each other anymore. She's gathering her strength, getting her things in order, and when she's ready she's going to confront him, and he'll be there if she wants me to, not as the perfect ex-wife, but as a witness to show him that his lies have a limit, that his pattern ends with us. There's a real power in that, in knowing you're not the problem. The problem is the person who goes from woman to woman trying to break them with the same old tools, and we're throwing his tools away. So my husband tried to roast me at dinner last night. It was a classic family scene, you know. The table was crowded, everyone talking over each other, my aunt telling the same story for the third time, and there he was, my husband, looking so pleased with himself. He gets this way sometimes, thinks he's a real comedian. Usually I just let it slide. He'll smile and make a note of it in my head. But this time was different. He leaned back in his chair with this little smirk. He got everyone's attention, which is hard to do. Then he said it. He compared my new haircut to his ex-wife's, said it made me look just like her. He said it with this tone like he'd just delivered the cleverest line in the world. The whole table went quiet. You could hear the clock ticking. My mother-in-law looked horrified. My brother just stared at his plate, but I didn't get upset. I didn't even flinch. I just looked at him. I tilted my head a little like I was thinking it over. And inside my mind was racing, putting the pieces together. It was almost too easy. I smiled a really calm, gentle smile, and I said, "Well, honey, it's no wonder she's your ex-wife, if that's the best compliment you can give." For a second there was nothing, just silence. Then my brother snortled into his napkin, and that was it. The whole table erupted. My aunt was crying with laughter, my mother-in-law was patting my arm, shaking her head, and my husband, his face went from smog to bright red in about half a second. He just shrunk down into his chair. I just sat there perfectly calm. I took a slow sip of my wine while everyone lost it around me. He didn't say another word for the rest of the meal. He just pushed his food around his plate. Later, my brother pulled me aside in the kitchen. He clapped me on the back and said, "I've been waiting 10 years for someone to do that, and I have a feeling this story isn't going away. It's going to be one of those family legends they bring up at every holiday." The time he tried to be clever, and it blew up in his face. The best part is he wasn't just wrong, he was defeated. And I didn't have to get angry, I just had to be quicker. The music was loud at that restaurant, the lights were bright, and everyone was dressed up. It was our anniversary dinner. I remember feeling happy, proud of us for making it another year. I had worn a new dress, a red one. I thought I looked nice. He had been quiet all evening. I tried to make conversation, asking about his work, about the kids. He just gave short answers. Then the dessert menu came. I said something about maybe sharing a slice of cheesecake. I was just being playful. He looked up from his menu and his eyes were just cold empty. He didn't even raise his voice. He just said it clear as day across the table, "Why would you want cheesecake? You look like a fat pig in that dress anyway." The whole world just stopped. The clatter of plates, the laughter from the next table, it all just faded into a dull hum. I could feel the blood drain from my face. I saw my own reflection in the window behind him, and all I could see was this distorted shape. That word pig, it echoed inside my head. It felt like he had just taken a hammer to the foundation of my life, to my idea of who I was, of what our marriage was. Everything I thought was solid just turned to dust in that moment. For days I was just a raw nerve. I cried until I had no tears left. I was so angry, a deep burning rage that felt like it could set the whole house on fire. But underneath the anger was this profound grief. I felt like the woman I had been for 20 years had just died. At that table I didn't know who I was anymore. I stopped trying to talk to him. I started walking instead, long aimless walks in the park for hours. I would just sit on a bench and watch the trees. I didn't pray in the traditional sense, but I started asking questions into the silence. Why did this happen? What is this pain trying to show me? I began to see how much of my happiness was tied to his approval. My ego was completely wrapped up in being a good wife, in being attractive to him, and he had shattered that. I realized I had given him the power to define me. There was a morning about a month later. I was making coffee, and he walked into the kitchen. He looked tired. And for the first time I didn't just see the man who had hurt me, I saw a person. A man trapped in his own misery, his own limitations. His cruelty wasn't about me at all. It was a reflection of a sickness inside him. He was lashing out because he was in pain. That was the shift. The moment I stopped being the victim of his words and became an observer of his suffering. Forgiveness didn't happen overnight. It was a choice I had to make every single morning. When I woke up, I would consciously decide to release the resentment, to untie the knot of anger in my chest. I did it for me because carrying that weight was exhausting. It was poisoning me from the inside. Letting it go was like setting down a heavy suitcase after a long, long journey. I didn't leave him. That wasn't the path for me, but I stayed. For different reasons, I stayed from a place of choice, not fear. My sense of worth now comes from a much deeper place, a place he can't touch. The insult, that horrible moment, it became a kind of gift. It forced me to find the strength and the peace I never knew I had. It led me to a love for myself that is completely unconditional, and that freedom is everything.